without further ado, welcome to the stage, Michele Matthews, Chief Strategy and Operations Officer for Purpose-Built Communities.
Por favor, denle la bienvenida a Michele Matthews, Directora de Estrategia y Operaciones de Purpose-Built Communities.
I was going to say, pero... All right, show my age a little bit. One of the funkiest bass lines of all time. I want you back. Hi, I am Michele Matthews, and I'm the Chief Strategy and Operations Officer for Purpose-Built Communities. And I'm like such a fangirl right now. It's my honor to introduce our next guest, but before I do, let's just take a moment to pause and reflect on our time here yesterday. What a day. What a day. You know, as I've been talking to people that this is their first time, and I've been talking to others that have been here, the theme has been, this was the thing that I didn't know I needed. We're in hard times. And to be able to come together and to be able to fellowship and laugh and learn is so important. So the insights and ideas and just the inspiration from the last 2 days have been really special. What about our opening panel yesterday? Doug, Carol, and Jack were just really great in helping us put this science and community together. And of course, that phrase, rock solid molecular biology, like that's what you all are, that's the science connected to community. It's just really affirming the work that we do is on the right path. And then we had workshops, and hopefully you had an opportunity to engage in smaller groups and learn in specific topics. I heard a lot of good things. I was in the one for the board members, and it was just fabulous. And then Illy and Shannon for our lunch. You know, speaking the truth, and really helping us understand how important it is to be resident-centered. And I think many people who are either, again, just joining this group or have been here, we've heard a lot about Eastlake, but to hear this from Shannon, the granddaughter of Eva Davis, who was really central to that work and a leader as a resident, really gives us a model for how we all can work together. So again, congratulations, Illy and the Eastlake Foundation team on 30 years of really good, really solid, and really hard work. And if that wasn't enough, Michele, we have just been really having such a great time. At all of our conferences, we go to one of the neighborhoods where we work. And the Galveston-Sharpstown neighborhood, oh my goodness. We had a block party. We saw the different things that the team is working on. We met with residents. Just really a great afternoon to show how this work has similarities but differences. In each community, its assets, its people really inform how the purpose-built model in this work comes together. I'm reminded that my colleague, I don't know where she is, I told her to be in the room. There she is. Katie Delp, our Chief Network Officer. During COVID, she said a phrase that I think stuck with a lot of us. The beauty and the brutality of the moment. And that is also what reminds me of today. Such beauty. You all, your smiling faces, the laughter I've seen, the dancing I've seen. Where's Tom? That's my dance partner. Is this moment can feel very brutal. A lot of things happening, but let's all remember that the beauty is with us working together and fighting for what's important. So today we're going to take another journey, this time through the lens of two world-renowned journalists. Race. I don't even think I'm supposed to say that word anymore. But race. This simple four-letter word can silence a room in 2 seconds flat. It carries the weight of history, the sting of injustice, and the unspoken tensions that ripple through our workplaces, our neighborhoods, and our nation. It's a word that can invoke fear, the fear of saying the wrong thing, guilt, the unease of confronting privilege, resistance, the instinct to deflect or deny, and anger, the fury of those who have been silenced too long. These emotions don't just stifle dialogue, they freeze progress. And so how do we break the silence? How do we turn discomfort into curiosity, division into dialogue, and history into healing? Enter Michele Norris, award-winning journalist, storyteller, and self-described instigator. We like instigators. Michele is a legend in the field of journalism. She began her career writing for the Minnesota Daily and later as a staff writer for the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post. In 1990, she received the Livingston Award for her reporting on a 6-year-old boy living in a crack house. From 1993 to 2002, she served as a correspondent for ABC News and the Washington Bureau, where she earned both Emmy and Peabody Awards for her coverage of 9/11. In 2002, Norris made history by becoming the first African-American female co-host of NPR's All Things Considered, a position she held until 2012. During her tenure, she covered significant events, including the 2008 presidential campaign. She is one of the most trusted voices in American journalism, well known for her unique ability to disarm, to provoke, and to make people lean in, even when the topic makes them look away. So back in February of 2024, my partner in crime, Katie Delp, who we read, and we love to read books together and talk about what we're reading. So Atlanta History Museum has an author series, and Michele Norris was there, and so Katie and I were like, let's go. And so really, Michele, this has been a year in the making to get you to this stage. We were so struck in that conversation by the brilliance of your approach to talk about race. We knew we needed to have her here with us in Houston at our national conference because we knew we needed to unpack race in a way that's accessible and roots itself in the human experience that moves us forward. So through Michele's award-winning interactive storytelling initiative, the Race Card Project, a project she also received a Peabody Award for, and through her recent book, who you all received at a registration, Hidden Conversations, Michele creates a space for truth, for vulnerability, for conversations we've been too afraid to have, but that we are committed to continue. So let's be clear. Our work of revitalizing neighborhoods and putting people on a pathway to prosperity cannot happen unless we reconcile and address the role that race and history continues to play in neighborhoods and helps to determine whether people are on a pathway to prosperity or poverty. We need shared understanding, we need honest dialogue, and most of all, we need the courage, the kind that Michele embodies every day. So please, join me in welcoming the extraordinary Michele Norris.
Oh, thank you for the walk-on music. I'm sorry I missed the dancing. So at least I got a little taste of it here. Good morning, everyone. I arrived last night, and I knew that I was in a special space because a lot of times when you come to conferences and they have a busy schedule, at the end of the day, everybody's kind of dragging. And I got in late last night, and you all were still popping, so I know that you've got some work done. I'm particularly honored to talk to you about this work in building communities and building neighborhoods for a few reasons. Community is a special word, and even more special right now. Community is how we will survive whatever it is we're going through right now, and that's always the case, but particularly at a moment where there are some who seem to be invested in division. I love that you are about purposefully building communities, because I think a lot about the difference between growing something and building something. Growing something suggests that you throw seeds in the ground and that you move on and something beautiful happens. Building requires the work, the toil. When you're building something, you have to continue to put your hands on it. And that toil, probably for all of you, has become a little bit harder because of where we are at this moment in America. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, but before we begin, can the room just do me a favor? Can you turn to the person on the left of you and say these words? The hill is steep, but we are strong. Oh. The hill is steep, but we are strong. The hill is steep, but we are strong. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because the hill is always steep when you're doing this work, but it feels like it's gotten a little bit steeper now. And it feels like that hill feels like maybe you're on the rough side of the mountain right now. And in doing that work, building community is even more important. I come to you this morning as a storyteller and a story collector. As Michele described, I've been in this business so long, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. And Carol, thank you very much for opening your space to me. I am a storyteller as a longtime journalist. I tend to roam around, so forgive me if I walk around the stage. I'm a kid who has a speech impediment, and so when I speak, moving around helps me. I'm a story collector rather late in my life. And I've always been a story collector because as a journalist, that's what you do, right? You collect stories. But now I collect stories more purposely through this archive that I run. And the archive is called the Race Card Project. And the idea that at this point in my career, after more than 30 decades in journalism, if I talked to a younger version of myself, I would have never imagined that race would be the centerpiece of my work. Because I'm going to be honest with you. For a long time in my career, I was trying not to be the reporter who covered race. It wasn't that I was ashamed to talk about race. It wasn't necessarily that I was afraid to talk about race, but I was concerned that if I covered the race beat, that was all I would do. When I was young and ambitious, younger and ambitious, I wanted to cover politics, and I wanted to cover policy, and I wanted to cover culture and maybe even sports, but probably not. But I wanted to have a big portfolio. And my experience was that if you covered race, that or at least my assumption was that I would have a very narrow portfolio. I had worked in newsrooms where if you said, let's have a conversation about race, if it was not February, you could clear the room. People would look at their watch and say, oh, look what time it is. I have somewhere else that I need to be. And if it was February, then suddenly you were very popular. People who wouldn't talk to you any other time of the year wanted you to write a 6-part series on a neighborhood that they normally would not go to. And then something happened that made me think, I really want to lean into this a bit more. And it was around the time that America had entered an allegedly post-racial space. You remember that? In the lead up to the 2008 election, and I've actually studied this. The word post-racial kind of came out of nowhere. It was not part of the American vernacular. I literally have studied this. It had only been used less than a half a dozen times prior to 2006. And in 2 of those cases, it was by accident. Jimmy Carter actually meant to say something else, and it came out as post-racial. Someone was referring to post-Dadaism, and it came out as post-racial. But then suddenly in 2006, 2007, that word was everywhere. And I thought that was interesting. Post-racial, we're about to send a black family to the White House, and we think this conversation is over? And if I could ask the room to to go back in the Wayback Machine. And do you remember when people started talking about America entering a post-racial space? I like to do a little call and response, if that's okay. When you first heard that word, what did you think that it meant? Anybody? Yeah, you? The silver bullet, it's been fixed. Anybody on this side of the room? Remember when you first heard the word post-racial, what did you think it meant? It's not going to happen. Anybody else? Yes. Race is not a thing. It does not exist anymore. Anyone else? Yes. I like my race. Why are we post-racial? Yes. Thank you for standing. Okay, he first heard it in a television satire, and it's been a joke ever since. But if you mention the word post-racial now, people almost roll their eyes. Like, how did that turn out? And at that time, I was interested in what was going on because we were talking about America being post-racial, but I was hearing something interesting when I was traveling around the country. I was going to Iowa and I was going to New Hampshire, and Americans were actually having an animated conversation about race, in part because of what was happening. Barack and Michelle Obama were about to move into the White House. We had just been through an election where we had seen a woman vice presidential candidate on the other side back in 2008, Sarah Palin. Remember her? There was interesting conversation. She was talking about Joe Sixpack. When you heard Joe Sixpack, what came to your mind? It was interesting because I was traveling and I'd met a man and he was South Asian and he ran a big restaurant, or actually a bodega, a store where you could get breakfast. You could get kind of a greasy spoon breakfast, and you could buy, a six-pack, and you could buy Coca-Cola and everything. And he painted the side of his wall in his store with a big American flag, because even though he came from South Asia, he wanted people to know, I'm American. This is my country too. And he said that at the end of the week, every week, when he would pay the cashier and pay the person who worked the grill, and he had a little bit of money left, he would get himself a six-pack. But when she talked about Joe Sixpack, do you think she was referring to him? Probably not. I thought America was about to have a really interesting conversation about race, and so I set out to write a book about that. And my first book, I was going to write about how Americans talk and think about race, but something happened. Every time I went home to my large, loud family, the elders in my family were suddenly having this really robust conversation about race. Now, I'm from Minnesota. My mother's a fourth-generation Minnesota, black family that's been in Minnesota a long time. My father's from Birmingham, Alabama, lived in the Jim Crow South. So it's not that we never talked about race, but suddenly, after they saw a black family move into the White House, it was like they had historic indigestion. All this stuff was just coming up. You would go to the one of these dinners, and someone would say, pass the peas. Let me tell you what happened to me in 1958. Sit down. And so suddenly they were just sharing stories. And I realized that there was a lot I did not know. They had kept a lot of things from us. The first book is called The Grace of Silence, in part because of that. I learned that my father had been shot in the leg by a police officer when he was entering a building called the Pythian Temple in Birmingham, Alabama, when he had just returned from his military service. Less than 2 weeks when he had gotten back, served in the military, he was in the Navy, he was discharged honorably and came back at the end of the war, fought for democracy overseas, and had this crazy idea that he might have a taste of it back home, but America was not ready for that. And so the veterans in Birmingham, Alabama, were going to these places to study about the Constitution, to learn as much as they could about the Constitution so that they could register to vote. Because in Birmingham, they had passed something called the Boswell Amendment. And the Boswell Amendment was a response to a Supreme Court case that came out of Texas. It was called Smith v. Allwright. And although the case came out of Texas, it had broad implications because the case determined that white-only primaries were unconstitutional. And for places where the black population exceeded the white population, that would upturn the apple cart. And so many of the communities that this affected responded in interesting ways. In Alabama, they passed something called Boswell Amendment, and that meant that if you wanted to register to vote, you had to prove that you fully understood the Constitution. And so these returning veterans were going to these buildings to learn as much as they could about the Constitution. Now, just to give you a point of reference, how many of you have seen the film Selma? A lot, a very popular film, obviously. So you remember that scene when Oprah Winfrey is dressed up as Annie Lee Cooper, and she is wearing her Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, and she goes to register to vote. Big deal at that time. She would not been allowed to register. She dressed for the occasion. And they started to ask her questions. You remember that? They asked her how many judges were on the appellate court. They asked her a few more questions, and she knew the answers because she had studied, just like my father was going to do. But then the questions got digi because they had no intention of giving her that voter registration card. They started to ask her things like, how many suds are in a bar of soap? How many flakes are in a soap box? That was the America that he lived in. And my father was trying to enter a building called the Pythian Temple, and police officers tried to stop him. A scuffle ensued. This is very odd to me to learn about this. I learned about it from one of my uncles in one of those conversations where stuff was just coming up. He said, you know, your father was shot. He was upset because he had been talking to me about trying to get young men to register to vote, and he had to work real hard, and that made him angry. He was angry in a way that, you know, pardon me for saying this, but only old black men can be angry. He was just fussing at me, and he said, you know, your father was shot, and I did not know. And so I set out to do research, and I learned about his story. I did not know. He did not tell me. My father was shot in the leg, wounded, when he was trying to enter that building. I went back and found the police records from that pay. He never talked about it. He had a wound on his leg. He did have a scar. He walked with a certain gait that I always thought, again, was just a black man walking like a black man sometimes does. I just saw Othello on Broadway, and if I, you know, Denzel Washington, when he walked out, the way the one leg just comes out a little bit later than the other one. But it turned out that he was carrying a wound. He was carrying a wound from an encounter. Luckily, it just grazed his leg. But the wound was psychological also, I'm sure. And yet he never told me, never told my two sisters. And this is the thing that is really crazy. He never told my mother in all the years of marriage, all the intimacies of marriage. Never told my mother. She learned about it from me after I learned about it from my Uncle Joe. I wrote a book about this, about all the things that I learned about my family, and the notion that even though they had gone through much, they had said little because they wanted us to soar. If you want your babies to soar, you don't put rocks in their pocket. They never told me that story. I wrote a book about that, and I was on a 35-city book tour out in America to write about the first book, or to talk about the first book, The Grace of Silence. And I knew that I had an opportunity because normally I'm in a studio. It was in the years that I was hosting All Things Considered, and I was out in the world on sabbatical, and I loved when I would get out of the studio and I could talk to people. So I wanted a chance to do what we're doing today. I like the call and response, to get out of the studio, to do this in a way where I could actually have conversations with people. But again, I thought, no one wants to talk about race. People would probably rather eat their toenails than have a conversation about race. So what do I do? What do I do to make this interesting? What do I do to try to bring people into the conversation? I knew we all have a story, but how could I get them to tell it? I turned to postcards. I asked people if they would share their stories with me in 6-word stories about race. 6 words. I printed these little black postcards. See the front side of it there. And they said, your story, 6 words, your story, please send. Now, my parents were postal workers, so maybe it's then in some way. My husband thought I was crazy. So, you know, people don't really use snail mail the way they think they do. My publisher was like, okay, well, you know, maybe. Well, let's try it. My mother, my father died many years ago, but my mother was still alive when I started this project 14 years ago, almost 15 years ago. She was delighted that I was supporting the U.S. Postal Service. But she reminded me that the initial postcards that I printed, I went to my local Kinko's and I printed 200 of these cards. And she saw the cards and she said, honey, these aren't regulation size. So the first cards, and this is one of the first cards, the first cards that I printed were not the right size, but still, people sent them back to me. And then after that, I got it together and I printed them and now the right size. But you can see the intentionality in these cards. I printed 200 cards and about 30% came back to me. And if you know anything about direct mail, that is a pretty good yield. And then you see that people, because think about it, a postcard. We have postcards in our rooms here. Did you notice that? They're kind of cute. Like, I'm wondering, maybe I should take these and send them. But would you actually do it? Would you find a pen? Would you find a stamp? Would you then find a mailbox? But that's what people did. And what I loved is that they would take the postcards often and turn them into something interesting. Most of the cards that we get now, and I'll explain this, come in digitally, but I love the postcards because I love to see people's writing. This is from a woman named Dorothy Yumi Garcia. She says in the back there, can you see me and my parents in 1957? For 6 words, no word for what I am. And I always start with this card because it is an example of how these stories are individual but also universal. So she's saying there's no word for what I am because she is the product of a mixed marriage. Her parents, as you see, are of different ethnicities. Her mother is Asian, her father is Latino. And what she's talking about is the choice that she would sometimes have to make when they enrolled her in kindergarten, when they go to the doctor's office. Now, we now have more boxes that we can check when we fill out these forms. But she was born in 1957, and she usually only got 1 box. So what lineage does she accept, and which one did she have to deny? I love the way that she turned it into a work of art, and she was totally on brand. You see that postage stamp? It's a Negro leaf postage stamp. Maybe that's just the only stamp that she had in her drawer, but I think that she was probably trying to make a statement. And it's universal also because we often live in little boxes of fixed certitude based on what people see when they greet us. When someone sees you, you're put in a box because you're white, you're black, you're Latino, you're Asian, you're indigenous, you're tall, you're thin, you're Southern. They hear your accent. But no one word can describe any of us. When I walk in a room, people might say big hair, tall, African American. That's only part of what I am. I'm a wife, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a cook, a would-be roller skater. I have all kinds of things in my personal portfolio, but if you only attach one word to me, there's a whole lot that you miss. I like to do call and response, so I'm wondering if anyone would mind reading these 6 words. Anyone? Just yell it out. You. So this is one of the earlier cards that came in, and this is an example of also why I love the postcards. He originally said, my father was racist, I'm not progress. He wants you to know that he's made progress, because it's an exclamation point. He understood the assignment because it was originally 7 words and he brought it down to 6. And I do appreciate that because when the cards come in digitally online, you can cut and paste and you can massage it. But on a postcard, you kind of have to, you're writing it out. And people are slick. They'll add like hyphenate words. So it's like 13 words, or they'll put words in carets or parentheses. But the thing that is interesting about this card is he goes over the words I'm not over and over and over again. And the cardstock on these cards is pretty heavy. It's pretty thick. And he goes over those 2 words I'm not over and over so much that the pen almost goes through it's an indentation that you can see on the back of the card. Why? Because he wants you to know that he is evolved. He is not at the place that his father is at. I love this card also because it is another example of how we all have a story to tell, but the story that we tell is often just so complicated and sometimes goes outside the 4 corners of the card that you were provided to tell that story. So he's talking about the relationship that he had with his dad. He's different. He's in a different place. So when you look at a card like that, you wonder, what were their Saturday calls like? If they're in different places, what was their relationship like? Did dad evolve too? Or was there some tension there? This also speaks to where we're at in America because most of us love, adore, or maybe cherish someone when you don't love, adore, or cherish their values. Many of us have been at the holiday table and Uncle Earl says something and the conversation goes completely sideways. But we stay at the table because we're family. That's the challenge for us as Americans right now, is to figure out how to stay at the table when we don't agree with our compatriots. I've been collecting these stories for almost 15 years. And beginning, they almost all came in via postcard. You see one there, did my Southern grandpa attend lynchings? It's a woman named Barbara. And you ask a question like that, and if you ask a question, you probably have an inkling of the answer. They were in shoeboxes and plastic bins in the third floor of my house. I created this with a wonderful woman named Melissa Bear, and she was in the kitchen table at her house, and I was in the third floor of my house, and all these cards were arriving at the UPS. I took out a UPS box, and they still arrive. And one of the guys who worked there as a young person now is the owner of the place. And the guys that worked at the UPS store, we love your project. Because think about this. People were doing this and sending these stories, very personal stories, things that you don't normally hear, things that I would never hear inside Studio 2A or 4A in all the years that I hosted All Things Considered. White, not allowed to be proud. Reason I ended a sweet relationship. You said dirt, so I scrub. Only Asian when it's convenient. Writing these on postcards and sending them without an envelope. These incredibly powerful statements moving through the U.S. Postal Service, and I just imagined it every step of the way. The mail clerk picking that up. My mother was a mail sorter. Now, much of this is done, again, through automation, but she used to sort the mail by hand, and I imagine someone like her looking at these postcards and saying, oh, wow, what's this about? And the guys at the UPS store would read these postcards, and they said they had the deepest conversations that they had in their lives because of the postcards that were. I knew that I had to keep going, so I created a website, and I created a digital form so people could send in their 6-word stories, and they just started to come in from all over the place. We have collected cards from all 50 states and more than 100 countries. And almost 2 years in, we added 2 words that were very important. Anything else. Anything else. And so when the cards come in digitally, people could send in their 6-word stories, and it was like, oh, you want to know why I chose these 6 words? And then they would send in a few sentences, sometimes an essay. They started to send us ephemera. They would send us maps of where people were buried. They would send us pictures of the medals that their families had. And this archive became this interesting way to understand America. I did this based on a mistaken notion. I thought no one wanted to talk about race. It turns out that a lot of people do, but they're just trying to find the right on-ramp. They're just trying to find a way where they can have the conversation and they won't face clap back or opprobrium. They want to do it in an intimate way. I include this slide because I want you to know that as I take you in the inbox and let you do what I do every day, to go in the inbox and see the stories that are arriving, I want you to understand that these are not my stories. They come from everyday people all over America and sometimes in distant lands who sit in the glow of their computer screen and type out their 6-word truths. They hold their phone and type this out with their thumbs. And they send in their pictures, which was another mistake that I made. My team said, as the team grew, a small but mighty team of just a few people, and they said, Michele, we should let people upload pictures. And I said, I don't want pictures. It's words. I thought it would look like Facebook, and sorry if anybody has Facebook stock or understands that, but to me, Facebook looks like a messy teenage bedroom. I do not know where my eyes are supposed to go. It's just like all kinds of stuff coming at me, and I didn't want that to happen on the website. And they said, no, I think we can do this elegantly, but I think that would add something if people could share their pictures. And again, I was wrong. We should allow people to send their pictures because this is how they adorn their stories. We thought no one wanted to talk about race, and they do. They do. They want to find connections. And for all the people who share their stories, there are a number of people who just come to lurk. They don't share their stories. They just want to read. They go to the racecardproject.com because they want to learn about someone else. So let's do that in the time that we have together this morning. Let's learn a little bit about America and its hidden conversations. The ones that you don't hear. As proud as I am to be a journalist, the conversation that we present about race is usually based on something that's in the news. It's usually reactive to something. It's not intimate. When people talk about race, when they set the agenda, they talk about their sons and their daughters and their husbands and their wives and their partners, their jobs, their memories. They talk about what they see out their kitchen window. It's a much more intimate conversation, and it helps us understand our beautiful and complex world. So let's go in the inbox. And when I did that, I start the way I always start, but in this case, we're going to do something a little bit different because of what you do. We went in the inbox and we went into the archive and we specifically looked for stories that were tagged. We tag everything that comes in. We understand that this archive will be interesting to people many years from now who look back and want to understand it. And so everything that comes in the archive, we realized, and I had a few people whisper over my shoulder, the historian Michael Beschloss, the actress and really thespian and activist, theatrical activist in our own way, Anna DeVere Smith, said you have to build this archive as something that will help people understand our world. So we archive everything very carefully, and we were able to go in the archive and create a deck that I'm going to present to you that is very specific to you, that looks at neighborhoods, that looks at communities, that looks at how people build connections in the places that they live. We're going to start here. Who wants to read this card? Thank you, lady in red. This is our most common card, some version of know where are you actually from. And it's interesting because a set of people, and then I've had people ask that of me, oh, where are you from? Are you, what are you? And, and you say, oh, I'm Minnesotan. Shagun is asked this question, and people say, what are you? And she says, oh, were they, in her case, you actually, she says, I'm from Naperville, Illinois. And she knows that that's not what they're looking for. And this is where the question usually comes, no, but where are you actually from? And this is where she says, she will tell them, I'm from that part of Naperville that's by the shopping mall, like over around by the Tasty Freeze. And she's pulling them out because she understands that she's playing a little game with them. But this is tricky because sometimes you really do want to know where someone is from. And I've always thought it was an innocent question, but for some people, it feels like you're more interested in what I am than who I am. And why is it the first thing that you ask? And so it's been instructive for me. And when we do workshops, we do a lot of workshops now with universities, with the business community. We've done work with the military and in former administration with the Justice Department, with embassies. And one of the things we often start with this card because it's been instructive. Maybe it's not the first thing you ask. And when you do ask, maybe you accept the answer that people give and then come around a little bit later and maybe what you are asking will come out as you get to know somebody. Who wants to read this one? Thank you. Thank you. We had it in stereo and from 2 different places. This is Dan. He lives in Baltimore. He works in the tech sector. And he is often asked this question, this comment is often made to him, and it is usually done in a way where people think they're giving him a compliment. And he has to decide, okay, so do I just say nothing, or is this a teachable moment for me? And that's instructive also, because how do you make it a teachable moment without making everybody feel digi and uncomfortable? Because he says, well, what would make you think I was Asian if I act differently? And then that puts everyone on the defensive. So I don't have the answers, but it's a good conversation starter, right, to think about that. I help, I'm not the help. This is Paul. And he says that when he dresses like this for work, doesn't he look good? Bow tie, took some time to tie that tie. Hat, his hands in his pockets just like that. But if he doesn't dress like this when he goes to work, he often gets a different response. People ask him where the supply ring is. People ask him to do things. And he says that there's honor in work done by people who are the help. But we should think about how we react to people when we meet them. Anyone want to read this one? Thank you. His name is Paul also. And actually, this is Jim. That's not Paul. I'm sorry. This is Jim. He's from Wisconsin, from a town called Sussex, Wisconsin. And I talked to Jim, and Jim is interesting. He says, and I'm going to quote a few things. He says, I face more overt racism than most blacks. I face more overt racism than most blacks. Now, I can tell from the look on your faces that you might be skeptical. And yet that is his truth. One of the things I love about this project is that it can bring people in the room who aren't part of the conversation. Right? You may not be in a place where Jim is in the room, but Jim's attitudes affect all of us. That is his truth. And so we can't dismiss it. He believes that, while much of black racism is discreet, he's been told to his face that he's not going to get opportunities because he's white. That he feels like the widening of the aperture in terms of bringing in more people of color, more women into workspaces means that opportunities have been taken away from people like him. And I am honored that he shared his story, because I don't know what happened to him that day, what he heard in the world, how he found the Race Card Project, but he went and around 8 o'clock at night sat down on the computer and shared this story with me. And it's important to figure out how to bring people in the room who are not in the room when we're developing policy, when we're thinking about ideas, when we're thinking about communities, because even if he's not specifically in the community that you're working with, he might be just outside that. He might be the people that you encounter. And to figure out how to bring people to the table so that Jim can have a conversation. So I've talked to Jim, and Jim says, I like roaming through your website because I meet people I would not meet. And I hear things that I would not normally hear. And I take great honor in that also, because in Sussex, Wisconsin, he doesn't meet someone like Paul or someone like Shiga or someone like some of the people that you are going to continue to meet as we move on. Anyone want to read this one? They burned Roscoe's house last night. This is from someone who lives in Lakewood, New Jersey. His name is Paul. And he says, I recall a day as a 5-year-old when my father took me to see a house that was being built by a coworker's son. The day was a typical bright, sunny day, as often childhood memories are, especially ones with significance. He says, seeing that house, which was set in a beautiful wooded area, smelling the newness, seeing the big wooden glass sliding doors and the joy on the faces of the young couple greeting my father and I that morning were off. I knew that someday I would want to build a house like that myself. His dad was a friend of Roscoe's. Roscoe was a veteran, and he built a house, and it was kind of a modern house. I think we call it like mid-century modern now. Big glass windows. He said that his father was so thrilled at his joy at seeing Roscoe's house that his dad bought him what he called a handy Andy tool. Y'all remember those? Little toys where you could build a house that, looked like something that your family would live in, like a little plastic wrench and hammer and everything like that. And then one day he came home and his father, he could hear his father, and his father was crying. And his father, who was never late for anything, came home late from work one evening, and Paul said he was already in bed. And he heard his father say to his mother, they burned Roscoe's house last night. And Paul said he was perceptive enough to understand that what they meant, and that it probably wasn't an accident. And he said the little house that they lived in did not conceal sound very well, so he could hear his father's sobs. His father was so upset. And he said, I didn't understand then and still do not. I do not understand when the same thing happened to a teammate a while ago in high school in the mid-60s. This did not happen in the Deep South, but in central New Jersey in 1953, and the latter incident in 1966. Also, I found out later that Roscoe had served in World War II with the Tuskegee Airmen. That was where Americans lost their lives fighting the most evil of prejudice. That was when I learned that prejudice lived in my community. This is a story that's in the book, and it may seem like a one-off, like this couldn't possibly happen. We have several stories where people have memories of something like this happening. And usually when people were aspiring to move across a color line, move into a neighborhood where they were not welcome, building a house that expressed a certain kind of pride. This story speaks to me because my parents, workers, lived in a working class neighborhood in Minneapolis, but were the first family to move into that neighborhood and move across that invisible line. And when my family moved into that neighborhood, every family who was their first black family to move in, every family whose property line touched ours immediately put their houses up for sale. The family who lived directly next door to us could not sell their home. And people put signs up in front of the house saying, you can figure out what the word was, lives here. So the family next door was not able to sell their home. And when they tried to sell their home, my mother tells this story. My mother's gone to glory also now, but she tells the story in that period of indigestion when she started telling stories, that when the neighbors would come to try to buy the house next door, my sisters are 10 and 12 years older than me, so she knew that a white family was looking at the house next door, and she would say to herself, showtime. And she would send my two sisters out in the backyard to play, and she'd undo their hair. And then she'd walk outside, and she was carrying me at that time, and she would go, we had a clothesline in the backyard, and she would go and hang sheets. They never sold that house. And eventually, a black family moved in, the Gossets, and my mother earned a best friend. Mae Gossett was my mother's best friend. They had two sons, same age as my older sisters, and we became very close. But what's interesting about that is on the south side of Minneapolis, that neighborhood became integrated. It eventually became integrated, filled with families who could not sell their house fast enough. It was blockbusting. And I've learned a lot about that also. People talk about, and there's a story in here we're going to get to, about people, when integration happened, one neighborhood at a time, that there were people who would prey on the fears of people. You got to sell now, because the neighborhood's going to change. But also what I've learned, and Ta-Nehisi Coates has done some excellent reporting on this, that was that all just prejudice? Because under our housing laws, what I now understand that is when my family moved into that neighborhood, the FHA rating for everybody else in that neighborhood dropped just by having one black family in the neighborhood. So even if you were down with the idea of integration, even if you thought Dr. Martin Luther King was sainted, even if you believed in a progressive America, this black family moving into your neighborhood messed with your money. Your house was suddenly less expensive, not just because of attitudes, but because of policy, government policy. And so these are the things that we have to understand, and we shut down a conversation about race. We're unable to understand our history. There is an effort right now to prevent us from talking the very word diversity. I mean, I'm glad I can even talk about this here because I'm going to be honest with you. There are some stages where I've been asked to speak and they give me a list of words that you can't use right now. That's where we're at. And diversity is often one of them. How do you not talk about diversity in a diverse nation? Look at the room that you're in. How do you not talk about the fact of diversity? It's like saying we're not going to talk about the sky, what's sitting right above us. And how do you deal with the kind of work that you do if you don't understand the history of how neighborhoods came to be the way they are? We often think that it's based on something that's anecdotic, that this neighborhood looks this way just because people decided to move there. Or this neighborhood looks that way because they work harder over there. They just have a different work ethic. And it's usually much more complicated than that. My white guilt is all gone. This is from a woman who lives in Colorado. And again, I appreciate that she says this out loud. She's in the book also. I called her. I said, I'm going to put this in the book. Are you okay with this? Because I don't want you to get in any kind of, trouble with your coworker. She says, no. A lot of people feel like this. please go ahead and use it. And what I appreciate is what she's talking about is feeling like, she says, whenever I try to enter a conversation about race, it always feels like we don't get anywhere. It often feels like we're struggling and there's anxiety, and I'm often seen as the bad actor, and it doesn't feel good. So that's something that's important for us to understand. Also, racial fatigue is really real. The idea that we're tired about this, we're tired of having these conversations. Again, the hill is steep. But that's why I add, but we are strong. Because when we do talk about this, I often say that when people say, I have to talk about race, one of the things I notice, actually, do you have to or do you get to? Because in a lot of places, people don't get to have that conversation. And if you do have that conversation, I guarantee you will be stronger as an organization. If you understand how to build bridges, particularly among people that you don't agree with, you will be much stronger as an organization, and you will withstand so much more that they can throw at you. So many more of the slings and arrows on the hills and valleys, not necessarily to get everybody to agree with each other, but to understand people's differences and figure out how to row in the same direction, even if you don't agree. I'm going to slip past a couple of these. Anyone want to read this one out loud? Thank you. At the Race Card Project, we often dip in and use 6-word stories for our business cards. And Amrit Dhillon, who was a member of our team for a long time, she's South Asian, and her 6 words were, "No, I don't like spicy food." Because we would go out to dinner and they would bring the little tray of hot sauce and they would put it right in front of her. And she's like, I can't eat spicy food. I have a weak stomach, gives me indigestion. So that was her 6 words. Melissa Bear, her 6 words were, Grandma, you can't say that anymore. I put this on my business card. Lady, I don't want your purse. Now, let me tell you, when you give somebody a business card and it says, Lady, I don't want your purse, they remember you. They definitely remember you. But I love this card for a couple of reasons. Because this is Hiawatha. He lives in, that's the name, Hiawatha. He lives in Tennessee, Nashville. And what he's talking about is an encounter I'm going to ask the room about. Is it okay? I ask another question? How many of you have moved about your day and you walk down the aisle of a grocery store or you step onto an elevator and you don't even know why you do it, but you kind of pat your wallet or you pull your purse a little bit closer to you? How many of you have done that? If you were willing, would you raise your hand? Are we being honest? How many? How many of you have driven in a neighborhood and you're outside of your zip code, maybe outside your comfort zone, you see people who don't look like you, they're on the corner, try to be slick. Try to hit the car lock. Just think. But the lock on the cars is so loud now. It's audible. You hit the car lock and it's like ding ding or doo doo doo, it makes a whole noise. And the person on the corner is like, Lady, I don't want your purse. Okay, on corollary, how many of you have had that happen to you? Where you walk someplace and people are pulling their purse a little bit closer? Raise your hand and raise them high. Now, it's not the end of the world. You go on about your day, but it hurts. But Hiawatha helps us understand in the backstory that he said, and I've interviewed him a couple times also, is that what he's talking about is being a person where your size and your color enter the room before you do. And it's not just about, the indignity of having someone pull a little bit closer, hitting a car lock. Hiawatha aspires to go into management. Can he paint with a full emotional palette? He works in a marketing firm, and many of his bosses wore. That's the management style. That's often the case in creative, it's often the case in newsrooms also. People are loud. Creative people tend to be loud. People who are in power tend to be even louder. That's kind of he can't do that. Because if he does that, he's suddenly the scary black man. And if he's a scary black man, forget about management. That's not in his future. So he walks in a different palette, and he talks about, I mentioned the elevator. He says everywhere he goes, he's jolly. Hey, how you doing? He dresses a certain way. He does not play golf, but he wears all the golf stuff because it makes, oh, okay, good. It's what Claude Steele, have you heard of Claude Steele? Claude Steele was now at Stanford, was at the University of Michigan. Before that was here at UT, Texas, where he did some really interesting work with Yuri Treisman about stereotype vulnerability. And he wrote a wonderful book. And this is, if you're keeping track, take notes, because this is one that is worth reading, particularly with the work that you do. And it's called Whistling Vivaldi. And it talks a version of what Hiawatha is talking about. And he realized as a black man and as a professor that the world greeted him differently if he walked around whistling Vivaldi, whistling the Four Seasons. Because people would, okay, he's safe. Good. I'm good. The last thing I want to tell you about Hiawatha is he said something interesting about the neighborhood that he looks in. It's called East Nashville. Anybody in here from Nashville? Nashville? So, they call it East Nasty sometimes, which talked about where it was, and it's now going through gentrification, and they have a lot of issues as these cultures are trying to come together to honor the community that has been there, that has a history, while new people move in and raise the housing prices and the livability standard in the neighborhood. But in many communities that have it, gentrification, it often is uncomfortable coupling. And he talks about going to the community meetings in a place like East Nashville. He says only certain people can say East Nasty. Don't say it if you're not from there. But he says he has to decide what voice he's going to use there also. Because the voice that he used places him on one side of the divide or the other. And he stands firmly in the middle of it. So again, it's something that speaks to the work that you do so well. These are stories that we get from all kinds of people in all kinds of places. And again, they tell their stories. That top story is Clyde, is Kyle and his wife Claire. Isn't that a beautiful picture they sent her? That's at their wedding day. And so sometimes the pictures are so beautiful. I actually called Kyle and I said, is that really you, or did you send in a stock picture? Because I'm about to put this up. And it turns out, yes, he just had a really great wedding photographer who caught them in a moment. His 6 words were, married a white girl, now what? And if you heard someone say that at a restaurant, you'd be like, whoa, what kind of day are we having here today? But he's talking about, them coming together and realizing that when they got married, they had a lot of similar interests. And again, I appreciate his honesty. He actually does work very similar to what you do in Grand Rapids, Michigan. There's a lot of working communities there. And they both came to a marriage in love. They like the same music. They like the same movies. They like to travel to the same places. But they both had an expectation that the holidays would look a certain way based on their background. And they didn't kind of negotiate that, and they had to kind of figure that out. Wait, you're going to cook that on the holidays? Wait, we're going to hang that up on the holidays? And he said, please post this card, because I think a lot of people in the cross-pollination of cultures that we see so comfortably now are having these kinds of conversations. And if they know that they're not alone, it is easier for folks to have that kind of discussion. We're about to enter our year next year where we're going to celebrate a big anniversary in America. So a lot of cards that come in around the concept of being American. I hope he'll look American enough. This was sent in by Karina. She was in San Jose, and she says that she's full Asian and her husband is a quarter Japanese. And once our son was born, she said, which one of us is going to have the talk with him? It's interesting because their version of the talk is different than the version of the talk that I was conditioned to think about, the talk that you often have with this young man of color or young person of color about how to comport themselves when I go out in the world, what happens, I could get pulled on by police. And they were going to have a talk with him about dealing with racism and identity as an Asian and as someone who has different identities as an Asian. And my husband replied very quickly, she says, that it had to be me, because even though her husband was proud of his Asian heritage, that he looked American enough that he didn't have to deal with racism growing up. and that he was Japanese, and so the racism that he faced was different than her. And she said that led to a 2-year conversation in their own marriage about how to deal with things. Anyone want to read this one? I'm picking. Go ahead. Anybody here grew up with a white picket fence? Anybody? Did you had your hand up? Yeah. Yeah, you had a white picket fence, you just went white. This card came in and it made me think of my dad we had a white picket fence. Minnesota winters are harsh, so he had to paint that thing every year. And that was part of being house proud, and it was part of being the first black family in the neighborhood because the yard was, you've heard about the myth of the model minority. I grew up with that. Our yard was going to be perfect. If he was going to be judged, we were going to pass the test. Painted that fence every year. But the young lady who sent this in, said that she fit the of what you think about when you think about a white picket fence. Yet people, because they saw the fence, would think about certain things. In the card that I just read previously, when I ask you what someone who's all-American looks like, what comes to your mind? All-American. Blonde hair, blue eyes, fence dogs, hot dogs, apple pie. I heard someone over here. And did anyone say anything? I heard something. But that's interesting because what does all-American mean? Aren't we all American? But we have certain ideas that we cling to about what all-American stands for. And the notion of apple pie and hot dogs. When you go to a sporting event now, what do you eat? Is it just a hot dog? When you go through the aisles in the grocery store, think about, all the different things that you discover there. I wanted to include this because anyone here from Portland? Is Portland in the house? Do you know what I'm talking about here? So apparently, is it just once a year? But some people more often than that? Okay, and apparently they do this in Seattle too. I've been to Portland several times to work with community groups there, and I learned, and this is one of the cards that came in that didn't codified it, I guess. Once a year, people in Portland have a naked I can't even say it, it's so strange, have a naked bike ride. Like they ride their bikes through the streets of Portland without any clothes on. It sounds really uncomfortable to me. But this is a thing, apparently, and it's a thing. And so this is from Trisha, who's from Portland. She says, I have a funny story about how race and gentrification interact. My son walked out of the front door of our house, which is in a neighborhood that is gentrifying. He yelled back in, Mom, I just saw 2 naked people riding down the street. And can't you see a little kid doing that? Like, what? And she said when she walked outside, she heard an African-American man's voice from just outside her porch yell to another person something like, well, they'd never let us do that. And I'm glad that we can laugh about this because you can just see every character in this story, right? But it is interesting about, again, expectations and assumptions. And when we have these conversations, this is why I say, if we get to have these conversations, we're laughing about this, right? The people who are trying to shut down these conversations say that it only makes us feel bad, not that it makes us strong. But the fact that we can laugh about this while also acknowledging the history and the psychology and the fears and anxieties that lead to these assumptions makes us stronger. You will have survived this conversation, and I'm glad that you're sitting through this with me, but you will survive it, and nobody is spontaneously combusting. We can do this. Anyone want to read this? Who usually says this? Well, Ginny, who lives in Alabama, or Glennie, excuse me, her name is Glennie, and it's not, people talk about how the neighborhood changed because it's interesting. We talk about gentrification. So you talk about gentrification, and it's interesting because in gentrification, you often have cases where people who've lived in the neighborhood, and they're talking about how the neighborhood has changed. Also, why do they have those koi ponds? They just attract mosquitoes. There's, an interesting conversation, but the one that you hear is usually the one that you're privy to, right? The one that you hear is the one that that is accessible to you because of journalists or because of who's covering. So she says it's always code. In fact, most of the people I've heard say this were people who themselves changed the neighborhood by leaving or sometimes by moving in. This is someone who said, I survived the white flight. Someone who says, Dad invited everyone into our home. Neighborhood party. We were not invited. I love this picture. It says it's her parents, and it captures a young Mexican-American couple with aspirations to live the American dream in the 1950s, only to find out that their neighborhood of 6 children, their family of 6 children would never be welcomed in their neighborhood. Years later, this experience has stayed with me and made me resolve to live my life with purpose and compassion for others. And she says everywhere she goes, she is committed to figuring out how to build longer tables. Because she was never invited in certain homes. And she says wherever she goes, she's just figuring that out. In her workplace, in her church, at her kids' school. She mentioned something that rung true to me. She was in her child's school and part of a diversity committee. And she says, if it's really a diversity committee, why is it only families? If it's truly a diversity committee, to make it diverse, let's invite more people. I love this story about 2 white children in the Halloween photo. Can you see that picture? It's from the 1970s. It's in Carrollton, Texas. It's from a guy named Dave Parnell. And this is before kids started to dress up like iPhones and ATM machines, where you would go to usually Walmart and get, a little Halloween costume that was also pajamas and those little masks that would cling to the back of your head with that little piece of elastic. And she said his kindergarten daughter, wanted to go to her friend's Halloween party, and he saw the address, and the protective father in me did not feel safe letting her go. But I called, and the African-American man I spoke to certainly heard the fearful white dad on the other end of the phone and assured me that they were holding the party in the house in order to keep the children safe. Short story, this was among the most memorable and fun Halloweens that he's ever had. And he almost kept his daughter from going there. And if he hadn't gone there, he wouldn't have met the dad, who wound up becoming one of his closest friends. So fear sometimes keeps us inside those boxes of fixed certitude. Someone says, I know what? I am the homeowner. And this was someone who was complaining about he was putting holes in the grass to put to prevent grubs from coming in. And someone came up and asked him, you should tell the homeowner that you're not doing it the right way. He said, I am the homeowner. How should I be doing it? And they had a conversation. I carry my home inside me. I love this because what does it mean? Does it mean the home you live in now? Most of us here came from someplace else. So what is the home you carry inside you? Is it a distant land? Is it the place that you grew up? But the fact is, we do carry the home inside of us in every space that we enter. And it's kind of a shame if we don't have a chance to talk about that so that people get to know us in full. The last story I want to share with you is about a card that a doctor gave me. And it involves this sign. When you see this sign, what do you think it means? It's outside of it's in an industrial park outside of, anyone here from Hartford, Connecticut? It's outside Bradley Airport near Hartford. When you see this sign, what does it say to you? Anybody? Pronouns? I couldn't see who said that. Pronouns? What? Okay, not welcome. What? Someone over here said something? Black people? Not welcome. Okay. Anybody else? I was given a picture of this by a doctor named Ted. He's a gastroenterologist, and I met him in Hartford. I was speaking there, and he came up to me afterwards, and he said, I want you to see this sign. I saw it recently on a trip to the airport, and I can't forget it. It's bothering me. Now, this was in 2015. I have received more than 750,000 stories, so I can't track down every story, and I apologize that I did not immediately get to it when Dr. Ted gave you this card, but it's stuck with me. And when I was writing the book that you all received, I said, I want to know the story about this. He saw this on the way to the airport. He was taking a shortcut to get to Bradley, and he was coming in the back way, which takes you through this industrial park, and he saw this sign. And Ted is Jewish. He has family members who survived the Holocaust and made their way to, I think it was first South America, but eventually here. And it stirred something inside him and made him really uncomfortable. And so you know how you can go to the airport, you can do a loop? You can come around. So he said to his wife, I need to go back and I need to take a picture of that sign. And his wife said, Ted, we're going to miss the flight. No, he said, no, we're going to do it. And so he goes around, comes back, takes a picture of the sign, gives it to me. Finally, I decided, okay, let me split this. The deal was with this. So I tried to figure out where the picture was taken. I had geo-tracking on it. I figured out exactly where it was in the industrial park, or kind of closed in. It's a really big sign. You see the building behind it, so you can get a sense of just how big it is. There's a dollar store there. There's a tire place. There's two warehouses for a big drugstore chain. So I was trying to figure out, okay, who does the sign belong to? Couldn't figure it out. Called people I knew in Hartford. They couldn't help me. Went on what my mother used to call the Twitters and placed a post on that. Anybody live in Hartford? Anybody? And their reactions were similar to yours. Means I don't like them. Pronouns, something. And finally, I figured out, okay, let me see if I can get someone to help me with the geo-tracking. And it got more precise with the geo-tracking. I figured out that it was outside of a Walgreens. Oh, I knew someone who used to run a diversity program at the Walgreens. So I called Steve-O. And I said, can you tell me about this sign? He said, oh, yeah, I was one of the people who put it up there. Ooh, good luck. He explained to me what the sign meant. They have several differently abled people who work at their warehouse. And because it's a warehouse, lots of people are in and out. It's one of their big warehouses for the entire mid-Atlantic region. And so there are salespeople that are coming in and out. There are big trucks that are coming in and out. There are management that's coming in and out. There are people who are coming to see their latest automation, checking out what they were doing. And so they put this sign up to say, you're going to meet people who are differently abled. And I want you to understand this is our philosophy, our being Walgreens saying this. There's no such thing as them, only us. No such thing as them, only us. So I first got this in 2015, but Steve told me, we had to take that sign down. We had to take that sign down because as America became a little harder, a little hoarser, sadly more divided, more people were coming to the airport or coming to the industrial park, and they were seeing the sign and they were having a reaction that was closer to Ted's reaction. We don't want those people in our community. We don't want them around us. So Walgreens took the sign down, but they didn't get rid of it. They placed it inside the building. So when you go in the warehouse, you still see the sign. You just don't see it outside, and people aren't having the kind of reaction that they had before. It's quite literally a sign of the times. It's a mirror that says something about where we're at. That when we see a sign like that, many of us automatically think that we're trying to exclude people as opposed to include people. Figuring out how to exclude people. So that goes to where I started. The hill has become steeper. The chasm has become wider. But we are strong. The work that you do has never been more important, but the burden that you carry on your back when you're doing it is probably heavier than it was before. The footing that you have as you're going up that steeper hill maybe feels a little bit less steady, and that's why community is so important. You lean on each other. One thing I know from the work that I do and from the world that I've inherited, the country that I love, is that when the hill is steep and when the mountain is craggy and when you feel like you have to climb up the particularly rough side of the mountain, that is often where we find our stride. If there are any runners in the room, any people who hike, you know that. You find your stride when you run uphill. It's actually downhill when you tend to get injured, right? If you hike, it's on the way down that you twist your ankle. It's on the way up that you find your stride. It's when you have to push a little bit harder. That's when you build muscle. That's when your knees get stronger. They hurt. It's when your hips get stronger. They really hurt. But it's also where you get stronger. You're climbing mountains, and I think that that is an apt metaphor because you talk about building stronger communities and building connections. So in communities, in the cities that we live in, how do we build connections? How do we find connections in places where we have to go in between those mountains? Mountains and the valleys, it's through bridges. And that's a metaphor that I use in the work that I do. We need bridge builders. I believe it is the most important skill that we can give young people today is to teach them how to be bridge builders. Think about the bridges that you travel in your life, wherever you're from. You're from all over America in this room. Literally think about it. Think about the favorite bridge. What is your favorite bridge? What is a bridge that you just really love? You know, for me, when I travel, there's a bridge that when I'm on the way on the East Coast, across a bridge in Delaware. It looks like it doesn't have enough guardrails on it. You feel like you're floating above water. I love the feeling of being on a bridge. It feels like you're flying. I love the Bourne Bridge because it means that I'm on the way going to someplace that's very special to my family. Think about a bridge that you love. Maybe it's a covered bridge. Maybe it's a bridge over a creek where you hike. But here's the thing about that bridge. You never go across that bridge in one direction, right? Most of us go across a bridge and then we return, right? You go across a bridge, you explore a different world, and then you come and you're edified and made stronger by everything that you saw and experienced when you were in that other place. The mind exposed to different things never goes back to its original dimensions. You go back to your place of comfort even when you go out into a world that maybe is new and unfamiliar to you. We have to figure out how to do that in a smaller way using metaphorical bridges, how to create spaces where we can explore someone else's life. You may not agree with what Jim says from Wisconsin. I'm white and I paid a price. But it's worth listening to him. It's worth understanding where he's coming from. You may not ever understand what it's like to be Hiawatha and have someone grab their purse every time you enter a space, but it's worth listening to him and understanding his attitudes and his experience. If we are able to figure out how to build bridges, we will be stronger as communities. Think about what holds up a bridge. And this is important to remember in the time that we're living in also. Bridge is held strong because of opposition of force. Yes, we are living in a more divided time. Yes, we are living in a time where there are people who are invested in our divisions, usually because it helps them. Usually because it helps them. It doesn't help you necessarily, but it helps them. But even in that oppositional force, as America may be pulling opposite or multiple directions, it actually makes bridges stronger. I studied engineering for 3.5 years before I became a journalist. I know this to be true. It's physics. It's tensile strength. The oppositional force that both that bridge up. So if we can figure out how to create sturdy bridges, one of the ways to do that is through narrative, is figuring out how to find each other through words. Words alone won't do it, but they'll get us there to a place where we can have better understandings, where we can actually build communities that can figure out how to remain tethered to each other when they don't agree, and perhaps especially when they don't agree. That's true for our communities, and it's true for the history that we have in the country, that we are, afraid to look back and acknowledge. And those histories help create the communities that you look at. And yes, it's hard to look at a history, some of what I described today, when one community moved in and another community moved out. When we had rooms like this, remember we're in Texas, there was a time within my lifetime, and I am not that old, where a room like this would be illegal. Where people who organized a room that had this composition would face opprobrium and maybe even jail time for bringing folks like this together. It was not that long ago. We're not talking about ancient history. But to understand that history helps us appreciate the America that we've parroted. Helps us look around a room like this and appreciate the diversity that is part of what makes America beautiful. I know from my faith that when I meet the end of my time on this earth, that I will be judged, hopefully not just for the worst of my actions, But I know that if I don't take the lessons from those things, that I will never be my best self. That's true for an individual, and that's also true for a nation. If we don't take the lessons from the moments where we perhaps lost our way, it is harder for us to find our best selves as individuals and as nations. And listening is an important part of that. I believe that we were given 2 of these and 1 of these for a reason. We put the emphasis on communication often on what is said as opposed to what is heard. And creating spaces where we can listen to each other is as important as creating the spaces on our digital devices, which you have all thankfully silenced, where we can all speak our truth. We need to figure out how to have ways where we can hear it as well. And I'm grateful that you've taken time to listen to my stories today, to go into the inbox with me today, to learn a little bit about the country that we all love. And hopefully you will be made stronger by that so you can do the very important work that you do by building purposeful communities. Thank you very much.
Please now welcome to the stage Rakia Brown, CEO, South City Foundation, Tallahassee, Florida.
Por favor, denle la bienvenida a Rakia Brown, directora ejecutiva de South City Foundation.
Oh man, I was waiting for my T-Pain song. Dang. No matter. There it is. Okay, y'all gotta put your hands up. Y'all have to put your hands go up. And they stay there. Yeah. Yeah. Say up, down, up, down, up, down.
Because all I do is
Win, win, win. All we do is win. Thank y'all so much. You know the T in T-Pain stands for Tallahassee, right? I'm not kidding. He's from Tallahassee. We have a street in Tallahassee named T-Pain Street. So he is from Tallahassee. So thank y'all so much for helping me to represent Tallahassee well. Woo. Okay, let me calm down. So good morning. My name is Rakia Brown. I am the CEO of the South City Foundation in Tallahassee, Florida. Let's give Michele Norris another round of applause for her eye-opening, yes, and thought-provoking session, which unpacks race. She makes it accessible and rooted in human experience that moves us forward. One thing that you shared is how we have to lean on to each other as we climb the steep hill. I would be remiss if I didn't take just a minute to share how the Purpose-Built Communities has been so supportive of me in my work. I have been, I've been a CEO in the network for just about a year and a half ago now, and I have been in my position and been so proud to be a new leader in the network. The community of practice has provided access to best practices and models of implementation that have helped me to inspire my vision and has informed the strategies we're implementing in South City. It has been the vehicle that mobilizes idea sharing and fostering connections between our organizations, but it's the heart of each leader that fuels it. From day one, the leaders in this network have embraced me like a sister and have shown me their support of me and our organization in our highs and lows and in between. Like in May of last year, when our neighborhood was unexpectedly hit with 2 tornadoes, leaving damage to homes and loss of power for a week. Logan and Reach Riverside made a contribution to our storm recovery fund that assisted us in providing over 300 families with storm radios. In this community, having experienced the natural disaster years prior, his compassion and support powered our resilience. To just last month, when we launched our inaugural community event, The Cookout, and Ms. Shonda from Woodlawn made time to come to Tallahassee and support me in our event, literally from setup to breakdown. At one point, she was setting up tables and chairs, and I was like, girl, you have no idea how helpful it was to me. I want to shout out my Florida Dream Team, Eddie, Upendo, and Travis, who are like in many ways home base a place to check in, celebrate wins, and no matter how small, get teased a bit and encouraged through difficult times. This work is hard work and it's also deep heart work. The culture of support and bonding through authentic personal relationships has been a strong anchor to weather the storms and cement my passion in proven paths of success exemplified across this whole network. So now I have some announcements for y'all. We have a jam-packed day ahead, so please listen carefully. We are about to go into workshops starting at 10:30. Lunch will be served from 12:30 to 2 p.m. here in the Legends Ballroom. Following that, the meet and greet with award-winning journalist, documentarian, entrepreneur, and host of Matter of Fact, Soledad O'Brien, will also take place in the Legends Ballroom from 12:50 to 1 p.m. And at 1 p.m. sharp, we have the final fireside chat with Soledad O'Brien and Carol Naughton about the power of storytelling, shaping narratives, inspiring change that you won't want to miss. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
This closes out our morning session. Please move expeditiously to your workout sessions, your concurrent breakout sessions. Please move expeditiously to your workshop sessions. Thank you so much. And we'll see you back here at 12:30 for our lunch. Yes, right here in the Legends Ballroom. We'll see you here at 12:30 for our lunch.